So this is an extremely important video that I don't know why I'm the one doing it, but I guess I'm the new FAWN, McKay, Brodie, that's why. So FAWN died 39 years ago today. The greatest female writer in American history, and I want to talk about this. Ogden, Utah, Weber State's historic blackballing, how they've attacked her. It's so disgusting. The Mormon Church even agrees with everything she said. So I'm going to read her last interview here, which is so important to this university to hear. She's the greatest alumni in the history of this city. I'm at the ceremony over there, and they're quoting Damian Lillard. What? Then they talk about FAWN's uncle, David O. McKay, who's the second president, and she talks about him in this interview. The greatest. The thing that they forget about her, Devoto also, Bernard Devoto, you know, he's an Ogdenite. We had the Bernard Devoto Debating Society right over there until 2000. They got rid of it. He's from here, across the wide Missouri on chemo. It's great literature history that they blackball at this university. This historic corruption, this corrupt university. This famous library, I'll give a little background. So Wolfgang, who is D.B. Cooper, was in here all the time, right here in the Stewart Library, right here. So Mark Hoffman, who said he read FAWN McKay, No Man Knows My History, while he was on his mission, started him on his path of, you know, the Salamander Letter, all his incredible work that he quotes FAWN McKay Brodie at the sentencing. He did all his forgeries in here. He had a key to special collections. So Edward Abbey did a lot of his. Edward Abbey's third or fourth wife was from here, from Kaysville. She died of cancer. FAWN died of cancer. So we'll go for a walk, and we'll talk about this, and we'll quote this. Now, tomorrow is the anniversary of 7th anniversary of Aaron Swartz passing away, and so we'll talk about. I'll do a piece for Aaron Swartz, and this ties into this, capturing the PhDs. That's what he was doing at MIT, downloading the PhDs. You know, that's why I put my PhD online for God and everybody, because you can't get any funding. You know, FAWN, McKay, Brodie, Weber High, like Kevin Blanche. So Thomas Moore was my English. He was head of the English department at Weber High School. Who's he? The Browning arm. He kicked me out, Browning, you know, for standing up. So we'll go for a little walk. You know, the literary giant, she was a conservationist. They didn't call themselves environmentalists. They call her last line of her life was, her last request, everybody says, oh, ask for a blessing over here at the hospital. She died 39 years ago today. No, her last request in print was to have her ashes spread on the Santa Monica Mountains, which she's the one that protected that from the developers. Bernard Devoto from here, you have to go up to Idaho to look at his national forest, which is named after him. They're from Ogden. She's Weber State, a professor here. I mean, Weber High School here. So we'll read this. We'll go for a walk. Come on. I'll get this book reader here. I got him reading freaking Jefferson's biography. Now, this is important. So FAWN, when she did Jefferson's biography, hypothesis, and she's a history. She's a research PhD. She's a research PhD. So, by the way, she was a librarian. She was a reference librarian at the University of Chicago.
Postdoctorate.
Even before, I mean, she was a who's who at Weber High School. A teacher found her and wrote her who's who when she was like 14. And the teacher called her the biggest genius she'd ever met. And so she ends up at Weber State at 15 years old.
Just like you. Yeah,
I started here at 15. I won an art scholarship. I was too young, out of control. But everybody, now FAWN McKay Brodie's mother was named FAWN Brimhall. Yeah, that Brimhall. Yep. You know, and so she talks about her in this, and I want to read this last interview of her. Now we'll walk over here. This is important. This historic, corrupt university. This place is so disgustingly corrupt you don't even want to know. She talks about her uncle, and she was all about integrity. All about integrity. Now when she did Jefferson's biography, she hypothesized, you know, all these different people were his bloodlines from him having sex with black slaves. You know, had sex with thousands. She even told her husband, she says, well, doing research on, he's even got me charmed from the grave. If he was alive, I'd leave you for him. That's how much she loved him. And then a woman did a dissertation on her work in '97 with DNA and proved everything she said was right. And she was 40, 50 years ahead of her time. The Mormon Church agrees with everything she says now. Everything. You know, so why is this university blackballing? Why the university blackballing Kevin Blanche? Why do They're cowards. That's exactly right. They're cowards. You know, it's a university of cowards. It's a Utah state of cowards. The truth means nothing to these people. Fuck the truth. Why would you blackball the greatest female writer in American history, the first female history dean in American history, who's ours? I went to the same high school as her.
It's like they say, you're better off being an enemy in the United States than a friend.
Well, how about Jefferson's? Jefferson put his hand on the Quran when he freaking got sworn in. You do know that.
Oh, yeah, from yesterday.
Yeah, so Jefferson was a philosopher. He was studying all kinds of different religions. How about Jefferson's other quote? Organized religion is the root of all evil. So I want to stand here to start this. We don't freeze to death, right? What a school business that I got blackballed from when we were the #1 school business in the United States when I taught here. Did you see him mention Clyde Cooley's name? Now they're the last. They go from 1 to 512. They only test 512 last. Don't go see the Dalai Lama. That's who these people are, you know. And so, see the name on that wall? Let's start this reading here. Okay, here, hold this camera for me. Just, yeah, any old way, just,
like
yeah.
That?
Yeah. Okay, let's read this. What was your mother's reaction to your disbelief of Joseph Smith's divine calling as a prophet? Mother was a kind of a quiet heretic. By the way, heretic, so was a guy named Michelangelo. He had to hide in the bunker. Talk about an artist. Which made it much easier for me. Her father had been normally devout, but her president of Brigham Young University. Yes, that's Brimhall. President Brimhall, BYU. That's her grandpa. And so president of Brigham Young University had brought in like G. Stanley Hall and John Dewey. Now think about this. This is the president of the Mormon Church. Do you know who those people are? I mean, he brought in G. Stanley Hall and John Dewey as lecturers at BYU. So where's this state gone? And philosophers and psychologists who were fascinated by the Mormon scene. He was a very open-minded man and a fine educator. Some of his rubbed off on my mother, and so I say. My grandfather was not a heretic, but his children were, so rather than some, they were. What about your brothers and sisters? Well, my brother is still a devout Mormon, but my sisters are all what we call Jack Mormons, since they're all still technically church, but they are not active, and they don't go along with the Mormon dogma. God, she's so great. They still count themselves Mormons, and that's me. I'm a Jack Mormon. I come from Abraham Hunsaker IV, my grandpa. I knew Fawn very personally. I knew her very well. She was a genius. Oh no, I am an excommunicated Mormon. I was officially excommunicated when the biography of Joseph Smith was written and published. About 6 months in publication, there was formally excommunicated. Now, as you know, that's a copy of the excommunication document. As you know, I call myself, all men know my history. Joseph Smith's line, no man knows my history. That's her book. What you care to explain more about that? I was excommunicated for heresy, and I was a heretic, and specifically for writing the book. My husband was teaching at Yale at the time, and we were living in New Haven, Connecticut. 2 Mormon missionaries came to the door and presented me with a letter asking me to appear before the bishop's court in Cambridge, Massachusetts to defend myself to heresy. I simply told them I wrote a letter telling them that I would not go because, after all, I was a heretic. So then I was officially excommunicated and got a letter to that effect.
There's no disagreement.
No, and so remember who she is. President Brimhall's granddaughter, and she's David O. McKay's niece. This was because writing the book, No Man Knows My History. That is right. When you allowed ample access to records and manuscripts when you were writing the book, almost all of the material in the book came from 3 libraries. At the University of Chicago, where I was working after I married Bernard, there was really a great collection of Western New York State history. Now this is important. While she was doing her research, she worked at the reference desk as a librarian. That's why I want to do that at our library. There was a really great collection of Western New York State, so by going through the material, I was able to find out something about the sources of Joseph Smith's ideas, particularly the ideas which went into the writing of the Book of the Mormon. I finally end up going to Albany, New York, where all the newspapers were kept, were published in Joseph Smith's own hometown of Palmyra, New York. I was able to read the newspapers he had read as a young man. This turned out to be an absolute gold mine. A lot of these theories about the American Indians began descending in the lost 10 tribes and was descriptions of what they had begun found in the Indian mounds were in the newspapers. The speculation was there. That was extremely important, as I was an anti-Masonic material. The anti-Masonic excitement was very strong at the time. When I went to the Library of Congress in New York Public Library, the New York Public Library has best Mormon collection of the history outside. Now this is important because I restored the Masonic temple and they literally have blackballed me. They still run the show around here. Do not kid yourself. And all of Joseph Smith's teachings they were Masonic. The ceremonies are Masonic. You know, Wattis, E.O. Wattis, the Wattis School of Business. He's a 33-degree Mason who built the nuclear industry, by the way. I didn't go to a recognized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints of Independence, Missouri, and I did go to the Library of the Salt Lake City and some periodicals, early Mormon periodicals that I couldn't get anywhere else. I was permitted to see those, but I was not permitted to see any manuscript material. Question: are those church archives open now? I read a comment in Ted that they believe that the book would open archivally material. No, they're not, by the way. It had the reference effects. The archives were largely closed to scholars after my book came out. But in recent years, they have become open again. Now they're closed again, by the way. The new man is in the head of the church historian's office is Leonard Arrington. Now I'm going to write a book about Leonard Arrington, a fine historian, which he wrote The Great Empire. He's from Idaho, by the way, and I think he's a criminal derelict is what I think. He did more damage, and this was after she died he did the damage, but you know, and I could write a big book about her, and DeVoto went after him. Bernard DeVoto was the opposite, and it was DeVoto versus Arrington. DeVoto hated him, called him the biggest liar there ever was, and he wrote The Great Mormon Empire. Liberal in the attitude of other historians, the younger scholars are now being given the access to archives in a way they're not before. I think that was long overdue, but it's not a trend. And that trend ended right after she died. There was a fear about something else would be the same thing you did. Question: that's right. I think should be very exact in my statement. It is not quite true to say that the manuscript sources were denied to me. I had been told that there was a diary of Joseph Smith. Here's a picture of this diary. In my own handwriting and writing when he was in the early 20s, I knew one man at the Brigham Young University who is now dead, who had seen it and read it. But when I was asked to see it, I was told I could not see it. Then I had a very long talk and a very difficult interview with my uncle, David O. McKay, who I knew very personally. My grandma and him were very close friends. Afterward, he told me I could see the manuscript, but by this time the family situation had become so delicate that I felt I would rather not take advantage of my uncle's name to use the material. I wrote to him saying I would not ask for him any more material, and I never went back to the church library. So technically I was given access, but I did not use it. It was made very clear to me that it was an extreme difficult family situation. That was the way there's the integrity of this woman. And this is before the book came out. And she could have blew things 10 times out, and she didn't, because she cared about her family. Was this after you began a career in writing? You had thought about this long before your dear. Oh, I had always wanted to write fiction. I discovered that writing numerous short stories, that this was not my forte. After I was married, my husband, who is Jewish and totally new to the Mormon scene, was very fascinated by it. In answering his questions, this simulation desire to myself to find out the roots and the sources of what Brodie's ideas were. In any case, I started out not to write a biography of Joseph Smith, but to write a short article on sources about Mormonism. She took the first step, right? In my research at the University of Chicago Library, I thought I had some answers, but having done that, I had by the time done enough research to realize that first there was no good biography on Joseph Smith, and also I had to answer the questions myself. And the Book of Mormon came out of his background in Western New York, which he enlisted came from the Golden Plates. Then what kind of man was this? The whole problem of his credibility, and I thought was crying out to some explanation. So when I moved to the much more difficult task of writing a biography, I was a piece of detective work that I found absolutely compelling. It was fascinating. It was fantastic. I was gripped by it. I spent 7 years doing the research and writing. This is important because a real PhD like myself, we do the research. We get no funding. I'm just like her. What they've done to me at this university, same thing. I do the work, and my YouTube camera proves I do the work. Aaron Swartz. Question: Where did you include your supplement, and what did you have in the original edition? And mostly, what is the matter of typing and render know what happened to the Mormon research in the 20 to 25 years since the first edition? Some very important material has come out in the church about the so-called first vision of Joseph Smith. It turned out that their versions of the first vision, each one quite different than the others. This bore out to my theology and my evolution character of the first version. Then where some of the information data, now this is a question about the Holy Bible called the Book of Mormon. I've been told everything thought that the Paralla and Joseph Smith is supposed to have translated into the Book of Abraham, verse Chicago, turned into, now this is important. The Book of Abraham turned out to be burned in the Chicago fire. Now let me liberate, because she goes on this question and rambles on this question. So this is important. So the Mormon theology is based, the Doctrine and Covenants is on that scroll that Joseph Smith bought with it, which cost $1 million a year. There was a traveling salesman traveling around Europe, and he'd stole this mummy out of Egypt, and he was traveling around 2 towns. Joseph Smith said that this was the prophet Abraham, and the death scroll proved it. So they bought it. The Mormon Church spent millions of dollars by today's money on it. He bought it. And so he spent 3 or 4 days, with his Urim and Thummim and his translating this Egyptian script, because he could not read Egyptian. He said that it was Abraham, and he spent days. So what happened, it was supposedly burned in the University of Chicago. It was FAWN McKay Brodie's work, and Dr. Azari, University of Utah, was at the New York Museum, the historic, which I do a lot of work there, and I have a box there too. Somebody come up and says, "Hey, you interested in this, Dr. Azari?" University of Utah, this is Emma Smith's. What? Yeah. So he brings it home and presents it to the Mormon Church, front page of the Ogden Standard, KSL. And so then all the historians went to work on it. It was a commoner script. Is it still going?
Yeah.
It was a commoner script. But also I felt that it made speculations in nature of Joseph Smith's relations and his brothers. Particular was that the father and the known of the Book of Mormon was something that I had not realized before. And I had not paid attention to his childhood and the relations of his 5 brothers, because the Book of Mormon is a story of fabricated. It is brother killing brother all the way through. I felt this was an important idea which I did not significantly thought out before. This is talking on her 2nd edition. I had stricken it, and a kind of thing I felt too that there was no more material in mother and father that I could use. So I said that I had to do it over again. The earlier portion would be more thoughtful done, and I think too it was discussed the nature of the identity problems, which I think was severe in psychological terms. I could not have been in the case of this known anything about it. Now this is important because she wrote the character building of Nixon, commissioned by the United States government. She was not only a psychiatrist and a history professor, she had it all, this brain. Would you care to commit a little more in depth of that? Well, it was just that I think he falls into a pattern which has been written about in very great skills, a psychological pattern which has been written by Phyllis Greenacre, a psychiatrist who did a wonderful perspective article called The Imposter. She defines the imposter critically in a way that doesn't think of an imposter. She discussed the identity problem of the imposter, has the degree to which he needs an audience, and the degree of which the audience, you might say, conceives in impostorship. They want to believe his claims. In the case, I think the audience wanted to believe. That is what proved a prophet, so the two work together. But it's not, this is important, it is not fair to describe him as a simple impostor. And this is so good. This was a very special, complicated story. I didn't think to use methods, but was this part of the change? Did the contribute to getting away? Answer: I was convinced before I ever began writing this book that Joseph Smith was not a true prophet. To the use of Mormon phrase, once I learned about the scientific evidence, which is overwhelming, that the American Indians are Mongoloids, which that's unarguable. They're Asians. I was no longer.
That doesn't mean they're Mongols, though.
Well, there's 3. Yeah, there's 3 different types of humans, which is documented, and that's what they call them. That's what they're called. That's the type. They're Asians.
Wow.
So
look at that, Asian.
That really prompted you to write about him this time. Now this is important because at the ceremony up here, Darren Perry, who's head of the Shawnee Nation, we got the Bear River Massacre coming up, and Darren Perry wore his headdress. He's a piece of shit. Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ. Thank you in the name of Jesus Christ for murdering 512 people as they slept. Well, as I always looking back, it was a rather compulsive thing. I also, too, this is partly that I wanted to answer a lot of questions for myself. There are many questions to this. No answer for me is certainly to get the answers in Utah. Having discovered the answers, being excited about them, I felt that I wanted to give other youth doubting Mormons a chance to see the evidence that is put into the fact, and I've always wanted to write. Maybe it is possible, not possible, made in imperative that I do a serious piece of history. I found the detective work exciting, but there was always anxiety about, because I knew that I might difficult in my family. Were you still at the University of Utah? But that's where there's a flaw right there. No, she was here at Weber State, University of Utah at the time. Now this is important. She said her dissertation was that he was an improvisational genius. That got her excommunicated, which the Mormon Church says that's what he was. No, when I was writing the book, I had a job at the University of Chicago as a librarian. I was never trained librarian, but I was handed out books in the circulation department. I loved it. The women for whom I worked were very sweet, and I had a certain time of reading, especially when I was on the night shift. My husband was getting his doctorate degree at the university, so I had about 2.5 to 3 years working at the library, was deeply involved in major research. How long totally did it take you to do the research? 7 years, real important. But I had a job and was working most of the time, and then the last years I had a baby. Therefore, I never had full time to work on it. Did you have a master's degree at this point? Yes. In what? English literature as a historian. I completely self-taught at that. Now remember this. English literature as a historian. I am completely self-taught at this time. That's important. At the University of Chicago, the emphasis... By the way, Dr. Cooley came from the University of Chicago. Still going?
Yeah.
Keep it up. The emphasis in the English literature was a historical method so I could get good training later. It changed to the emphasis was criticism rather than on history. I received excellent training in the historical method. Did you restrict yourself to biographies excluded? Yes, especially for an occasional thing like the speeches here and there and the general historical thoughts, but I find biographies what I love and more comfortable with it. I am happy with the narrative technique that I am the topic method. Essentially, I am a storyteller, and this is where your manuscript, your heroes. All historians are manipulated by virtue of the section of the material. Manipulate is a nasty word. The good historian tries to manipulate deliberate, but to let to the material shape itself. I found especially the Joseph Smith book sometime fascinating. Was a work of non-Mormon, anti-Mormon, and Mormon material, and I would get all three different versions of the same episode, always 2, sometimes 3, and when I put them all together, the picture emerged that I believe had nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with my selection. I was just putting back the versions together then. As I say, I was a little like building a mosaic. It was a combination. It was not all latent birthright. It was very high and had very fantastic missionary system. And I said the church is a brotherhood which offers wonderful things, especially to young people. As a young people's program is very impressive. The work ethic is one thing that I greatly admire. Unfortunately, the brotherhood expels blacks, which I think is sad and which I have written about. I think the roots have been Mormon history and exclusive to unnecessary, but I think it has contributed. What you do think for that reason is, this is important. In my Joseph Smith, I describe the detail of the Mormon historians too, how they have written into the much greater detail I have. The church was not anti-black until it went to Missouri, which was a slave state. The big block of non-slavery people ran great difficulty, were perspective driven out of the state. During this period, Joseph Smith made some statements which seemed to be pro-slavery and anti-black, but later when he was in Illinois, he reversed himself and became almost an abolitionist. When he was running for president, he became very strong abolitionist statements, but the anti-black ones were accepted. The pro-black ones were not. But plus some unfortunate things in the holy books, the book of Abraham, saying his unfortunate anti-black statement crystallized in Utah via Brigham Young. In his more responsible for this Joseph Smith, their ideas were violated, and the Mormons decided to no black should be permitted into the temples to take part of the secret ceremonies. A perspective, quite I think that's significant. This is the end. What was your mother's reaction to the disbelief in Joseph Smith's calling a prophet? Mother was kind of a quiet heretic. Oh yeah, so I read that. So it's important. Here, let me see. Thank you for holding that. You know, I know you froze your ass off. Still going, but she died 39 years ago today. And tomorrow I'm going to do a piece for Aaron Swartz. And Devoto, who wrote the Great Centennial. You know, I talk about Arrington. You know, I talk about all right here. Right there in that building, we used to have the DeMar Devoto Debating Society. People used to come from all over the world. Scowcroft was him here. How about Wallace Stegner? I knew Wallace Stegner personally. My grandparents were friends with him. But my grandfather, Abraham Hunsaker IV, who was very good friends with FAWN McKay, one of the richest men in the country, found the gold. He was a German revivalist. He was a socialist. He was a communist. He didn't believe in inherited wealth. I was required to learn a trade by the time I was 15 years old. I didn't inherit 1 penny. I'm glad that I didn't. But, you know, and they were big broad on literature and reading and knowing these stories and expanding the mind, which I did, and I still do. So, stay tuned. We'll do more.